In theory, government workers can apply for religious exemption to vaccine mandates if they have a sincerely held religious objection. In practice, though, exemptions have been very few and far between. In the military, for example, as of February 24th, the Air Force had approved 13 requests, the Marine Corps 3, the Navy 1 conditional approval, and the Army 0. There are many lawsuits in play across the country, but this week the Supreme Court declined to take a case launched by Maine healthcare workers. Meanwhile, it's also come to light that the federal government is tracking people who apply for exemptions. With us to tie all of these threads together is Matt Staver, chairman of the Liberty Counsel, the legal group behind many of these lawsuits. Matt, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
This is a little bit complicated, but extremely important. I wonder, can you explain to us the specifics of who's creating this database and what is it for?
Well, the database began with the United States Army. They're not only tracking their exemptions, but they're monitoring them, and these are now going to be continually archived in the National Archives. That is the first entity that we know of that began tracking, but now there's 55 federal departments and agencies that have promulgated 57 rules. Most of these rules have been done on a, quote, emergency basis, so they've bypassed the typical public comment, and most of those are in effect now. 55 departments and agencies. And so what are they tracking? They're tracking individuals, particularly employees, but not exclusive to those employees. Could be contractors, it could be guests, could be visitors, could be people attending an event sponsored by one of these departments that have asked for a religious exemption. You have to ask yourself the purpose of these. Why do they need to have this permanent database that will be archived in the National Archives on a permanent record? There is no real good answer to that, but they are tracking not only whether you applied for a religious exemption, but even your doctrinal views, even kinds of conversations or verbal information that they may obtain through this process, including information from your clergy and your particular doctrinal or church or synagogue beliefs. It's very intrusive, and it is quite extensive, and it has happened within the last year.
Who has access to this, and what do you think they can do with this information?
Well, in some cases, the rules say that have been promulgated by these 55 departments and agencies that they can share it with other entities, other federal entities, for example, or other places as necessary. They can, for example, share it with someone outside of the federal government, including state, local, and international governmental agencies. So it doesn't have any parameters on how they can handle this, what are they going to do with it, and who they can share it with. The real question is, why do they need this? Why all of a sudden during this administration do we need to track every single person who asked for a religious exemption? How can it be used against those individuals? Well, certainly they can be used against the employees of the federal government wanting to transfer to another agency or department, perhaps as a career advancement or a different change of positions. They can look at that database and part of that transfer in reviewing somebody. And if they have a religious exemption, they can just simply be denied. You may not know that's why you're being denied, but that's part of the database that the place would be looking at. Not only that, if you wanted to transfer into the private market, you might be able to get tracked there. A lot of these people in the military, when they transition out, because of their expertise, they work for these different contractors or directly with the federal government and use that expertise. They could be blocked. In other words, this could be used as a blacklist for many people. And it would apply in all cases to the employees of these departments and agencies. In other cases, it would include federal contractors or any contractor that worked with these federal departments or agencies. And it could include interns, summer interns or other interns, guests that come into the building that may want a religious exemption for entering the building, or if you have an event sponsored by one of these agencies, if you attend that event and there's a proof of vaccination requirement and you wanted to ask for an exemption, you could also be logged as a private individual in this permanent database.
Is there any precedent for an action like this, a database like this?
There's no precedent that we have in our lifetime, certainly in America. The precedent that we have is from a dark period of history, and that is The Nazi government actually contracted with IBM to begin to document the Jews. And they documented them through their system. And once they documented them in terms of where they lived and whether they were Jewish or not, the government ultimately used that to identify them and eventually to isolate them, to put them in ghettos, and then even worse, to put them in concentration camps. I'm not saying that's what's happened here, but I can say that that is how those Jewish individuals were identified. It was through a private cooperation with IBM and the Nazi government. And you have to ask yourself, why do they want this? We know, for example, that people have been threatened who have given these religious exemptions. They have been terminated. They have been denied. Men and women in the military have been abused, and they have not been treated humanely in many of these cases. So having this kind of information, this data, not only that you asked for a religious exemption, and you may be a, quote, problem to this entity at some point in the future. They don't want to deal with you. But also your specific religious belief and the basis for your religious belief, and even the clergy that might have supported you, and the doctrinal positions of the church or other religious entity that you attend. That can only be used, I think, for a nefarious reason. There is no legitimate reason to have this kind of data in a federal database.
Well, and I think if we put this data point together, that this database exists, and the fact that they've been issuing so few religious exemptions, what do those two together tell you?
I think what you see is a purging of people of faith, because most of these people, not all, that are asking for these religious exemptions are obviously people of faith. Otherwise, they wouldn't be asking for religious exemption. They might ask for some other kind of medical exemption. So these are all people of various kinds of faith, and it's a wide variety. And I think what we've seen in some of these places of employment, including the military, is a purging of these devout religious individuals. And I think this is another aspect along that same line. This could be used to purge individuals from federal employment, from even the private sector, because of their religious faith.
I know the Liberty Counsel has been behind quite a few lawsuits that are fighting the mandates, but do you see this as a more important battle to take up against this database itself?
You know, it started off with the church restrictions, and we litigated there, went to the Supreme Court a number of times and won. Then the mandates came about, first with regards to students in school, then employees, then the military. We're litigating in some of those areas, and we're winning in the military context, but we have a long way to go. Now we have this. It all comes out of the COVID. And it's all being done under the guise of COVID, that they need this information for COVID, but we don't know why, because they're not telling us. This certainly, I think, could be the next field that we will focus on, because this is an invasion of privacy, of your individual autonomy, and certainly it can affect your religious freedom and your right to even work and exist. We already know that there's a lot of people, even in the administration as well as in the private sector, that are saying if you don't have the COVID vaccine, you should not be able to shop for groceries, attend public places, or even work. That life ought to be very, very difficult on you. This, unfortunately, could be one of those steps in that process.
Has the existence of this database and knowledge about the extent of it changed advice that you would give people about applying for religious exemptions?
You know, that's a great question. Certainly, I think you have to apply for a religious exemption. I think we take one bite at a time, and first we litigate and we obtain the right for these religious objections and accommodation requests. And secondly, we have to challenge these lists. These lists, I believe, violate a number of federal laws, and we will certainly take a very close look at them and begin to challenge them where we have to. And we don't have to challenge every single one of them. We don't have to win 55 different departments and agencies. We just need to win one and have an across-the-board stopping of this process. We're also urging members of Congress. There's a bill that's currently pending in the United States Congress that would defund all of these lists and stop them from any further action.
And do you think if they are ruled unconstitutional and canceled, do you feel confident everything would get deleted and the lists would disappear?
Well, certainly we want to stop them before they start. Certainly we'd like to have this law passed in Congress to defund it, but certainly if that didn't happen, we would litigate and not only stop it, but ask for these lists to be destroyed. there should be no reason to permanently archive whether any individual asked for a religious exemption. That is none of the government's business, and there is no good purpose for which to use that information.
All right, Matt, Staver, we're just about out of time, but is there anything else you want to add? Because this is such an important topic that I think a lot of people don't know about.
I don't think there's anything else. I would just want to say that this is a very critical issue with regards to the federal government of the United States creating a database that would track your religious exemptions and your religious beliefs and the basis for your beliefs. And in some cases, not only your objection to, say, the COVID vaccine, but whether or not you're taking other kinds of medications as well, whether you object or don't object to other medications. That is very intrusive. It's an invasion of privacy, and it's a clear invasion of our freedom, and it's very dangerous to go down this road. So I think it needs to be stopped, and stopped quickly.
Okay, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Be sure to watch the entire episode, now available exclusively at epochtv.com, a new completely censorship-free premium subscription platform. Brought to you by the Epoch Times. See you there.